Good evening, everybody. Again, this is Brian Hart with the Southeast Land Trust of New Hampshire, and welcome to the virtual public input session. We, of course, would love to be in person and seeing all of you, hearing your stories about Birch Ridge and your hopes and questions in person, but that's not really possible or the best for our community's health. So we're doing it this way. We have about 35 people signed in and are expecting another 10 to 15, but we're going to start at this point. I'm located in Exeter, so hopefully this remote session works well. And we do have Debbie Gord, our stewardship director, in the office as well. And then a large portion of the Birch Ridge Community Forest Steering Committee has signed in, just like you as well. And you'll be hearing tonight in part from Charlie Bridges, a New Durham resident, who's also the chair of the steering committee. So our goal tonight, just to remind you, is to give you an overview of the Birch Ridge Community Forest Management Plan as proposed by the steering committee. And hopefully you've had a chance to read the summary document on our website, or maybe you've even looked at the full management plan, which is pretty significant. We're also going to highlight some of the key activities we expect over the next 1 to 5 years to implement, and talk about the governance for the community forest, and then introduce the opportunity to expand Birch Ridge Community Forest by adding about 640 acres of adjoining land. And then after that presentation, we'll have opportunity for questions and comments that will help inform the steering committee, and we'll talk more about that as well. So we recognize that a lot of people might be new to Zoom, or maybe have participated but not necessarily engaged. So just to introduce you to some of the features of Zoom, you have a bar somewhere on your computer or phone that offers these tools. You can mute yourself with this button, but all participants are automatically muted and turned off when you first sign in. If you don't want us to see your video, you can turn that off here. If you want to send a question, you can use the chat feature. And Zoe, our tech support and volunteer and outreach coordinator, is monitoring that, and she's the CELT tech support name in the list. So you can send her questions if you're having some challenges. But if you want to ask a question of the panelists, you can send it to just the panelists or to all attendees and the panelists. That's important to realize in case you wanted to ask something private. And then finally, if you, when we get to the end, want to raise your hand, you can raise your hand on the screen and maybe someone will see it, but there is a blue icon for raising your hand that will alert one of us and hopefully get our attention for a live question or a live comment. So the other part we want to make sure you understand is for the next week, we're also accepting additional comments that might want to be written out in further detail. And you can send those via email to brcf@seltnh.org. We're asking for feedback by July 29th because the steering committee will be meeting the first week of August to incorporate and adjust if necessary and adopt the final management plan so that we can complete it within the time frame required by the U.S. Forest Service's funding program. All right, so I gave you a little bit of introduction to the agenda. This is a little bit more detailed presentation of the agenda for tonight. And Charlie Bridges will be joining shortly to introduce the management plan and the governance structure for the community forest. And then Charlie, Debbie, and myself will introduce different portions of the management plan. And then finally, I'll just talk briefly about the expansion opportunity for Birch Ridge. Then we'll have questions and discussion and next steps. Just to make sure we're all on the same page and understand what we're talking about, I wanted to give you an overview of the Birch Ridge Community Forest. And there are many people on this call that know this property better than us and better than me. But this is a map that depicts the property, and it has frontage on several roads, including Merrymeeting Road here, South Shore Road along the lake, as well as Birch Hill Road. Sorry, my mouse is getting hidden by a chat feature. It's over here, Birch Hill Road. It also has access through Fish and Game's property over at Cold Rain Pond. And finally, a lot of people access the property from the town beach parking lot, especially at this time of year. Now, the Birch Ridge Community Forest was protected officially last June 28th, so it's just been a year since it was officially conserved. And this was a photograph taken at the top when we had the community celebration in July of last year. And I wanted to take the chance to thank everybody who contributed and helped raise the opportunity and bring it to us, to Moose Mountains, and of course to the Merrymeeting Lake Association for their leadership in taking this opportunity and giving the community the chance to raise the significant funds necessary to protect the property. It was truly a community effort, and we're honored to be part of that legacy for the community. So the Birch Ridge Community Forest is owned by SELT, the Southeast Land Trust. We're a nonprofit land conservation organization based out of Exeter. We've protected about 23,000 acres of land throughout southeastern New Hampshire. And it's important for folks to understand that this property is subject to restrictions held by other entities. So the state's Land and Community Heritage Investment Program, or LCHIP, holds restrictions, as well as a federal program, the U.S. Forest Service's Community Forest Program. And finally, there's a conservation easement on the property that is held by Moose Mountains Regional Greenways, the local land trust that serves New Durham and adjoining towns. And the town of New Durham and New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services has what is referred to as a right of enforcement in that conservation easement as well. So this should provide you with assurances that the commitments about the uses and restrictions on development of the property are going to be honored, because there's a wide network of organizations looking out for the goals and vision of this property. So now I'm going to turn it over to Charlie Bridges, who is the chair of the steering committee, and he'll introduce the steering committee and more information about the management plan and structure. And I think Zoe's going to unmute you, Charlie. Just making sure it's working. It's a little tricky when we're not in the same room, and obviously Charlie's in New Durham.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Okay, Charlie. Hello.
Great.
Good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Thank you. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the Citizen Steering Committee to this public input session. Many of you, maybe all of you, were probably with us a year and a half ago in November when we had the meeting down at the school, our first public input session. As Brian said, we're sorry we can't do something like that now, but we do need to get the plan into the Forest Service by the end of August. So we hope that this is a reasonable alternative. The members of the steering committee are listed here for you to look at. They are a very diverse group with a broad base of representation. There are representatives from the Southeast Land Trust, from the Merrymeeting Lake Association, from the town of New Durham, from Moose Mountain Regional Greenways, as well as recreationists, foresters, other natural resource folks, and educators. I would like to thank the members of the steering committee for their efforts. When we submit this plan by the end of August, we'll have been organized for just about exactly 2 years. And while we haven't met continuously over that time, we've met a lot, and the people on the steering committee have committed quite a bit of time, and I appreciate it, and I know that Brian does as well. The steering committee purpose is listed for you here on the left side, and a couple of the high points there. The purpose was to engage the community, gather thoughts about how the property should be used, should be managed, and then to develop a vision for the Birch Ridge Community Forest, and from that develop a draft management plan that will be submitted to the Forest Service. Again, reflecting the fact that the Forest Service Community Forest Program provided a sizable grant to the acquisition of the property. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the staff of the Southeast Land Trust that without their considerable time and effort, the steering committee could not have done its work. And so we really appreciate all of their time and effort in logistics and in support and helping to guide us. Could I have the next slide? This is a slide that this and the next one that depict the planning and implementation process kind of in an overall view. There will be a quiz at the end, so we do expect you to pay close attention to this. On this phase, this is really the planning part, phase of work, developing the vision and goals, which we'll talk about, and then submitting the management plan. And that's kind of where we are right now, nearing the end of this management plan. I want you to note there that there were professionals involved outside of the Southeast Land Trust staff. There were forestry consultants, trail consultants, and professional wildlife biologists who worked on this plan as well. Next slide. This is outlines the implementation phases, and you can see, developing the plan is just really the beginning. You can see that the Southeast Land Trust and the steering committee will continue to work, although the steering committee is going to make a change. Once we submit the plan and it's approved by the Forest Service, we will actually disband the steering committee, cut those people loose to go on to other bigger and better things. And we will create a new entity called the Birch Ridge Community Forest Management Committee that will work closely with Southeast Land Trust. It probably will be composed of many of the folks that are currently on the steering committee. Be a smaller group. It'll be meeting less frequently, a couple times a year, more if needed, to address some of the outstanding issues that you might hear about tonight, as well as reviewing the annual work plan for the Southeast Land Trust. Next slide. The management plan, if you've taken a look at the entire plan, you realize that it is quite lengthy. It's over, the whole thing is over 200 pages in length, including all of the appendices. The first 25 or so pages are kind of a broad umbrella plan that pulls together the various components of public use and land management that are in more detail in the reports and the appendices. It's the broad plan that has a vision, goals, and short-term objectives and strategies. And tonight we'll be talking about actions, strategies, and actions over the coming 3, 4, 5 years. Next slide, please. The first step for the steering committee was to develop a vision for the Birch Ridge Community Forest. This is a statement of what we want the community forest to become, not necessarily what it is today. There are a number of important key points here that I want to draw to your attention, and hopefully you've all had a chance to at least read through this and the goals for the plan. But we envision that the community forest will grow into a mature woodland of high quality trees, interspersed with young forest stands and openings that provide landscape views and habitat for native wildlife. The property currently is permanently conserved, And our intention is that it will be sustainably managed for a multitude of natural resource and cultural resource benefits. And you can see them listed here. We'll be talking more about those as we go. The property will welcome a diversity of activities in all seasons, including things that have traditionally occurred on the property, such as snowmobiling, and perhaps new activities that traditionally have not been there on the property. Could I have the next slide, please? The vision is a broad and long-term statement. What it really is a destination. It's where we want this property to go. In order to get there, we need a plan. And just like, you know, if you were traveling to another part of the country, you know your destination, but you need to lay out a route in order to get there. In the absence of that, who knows where you end up. So we need a plan for achieving this vision. And the first step there is to try to break the vision down into pieces that we can then work on. And those are the goal statements. And we identified 8 goals that are spelled out in detail in the plan and summarized a little bit here. You can see non-motorized recreation, snowmobiling, education and outreach, scenic values, forestry, wildlife habitat, water quality, and climate change mitigation. These are the, I think there are 8 goals that we have for the property to help us achieve the vision. Once again, these goals are also rather long-term. And so to move forward on each individual goal, we need to develop objectives and strategies, and those would be the actions, the action statements. Many of those are short-term. Some may take longer, but if we can identify appropriate objectives and strategies, achieve them, then we can achieve each of the individual goals and move the property towards our vision. So if we achieve these goals, then we'll reach the vision. It's really that simple. Next slide, please. Tonight, what we're going to do is provide an overview of the highlights of key management activities over the first 5 years and talk generally about strategies related to the goals. The general topic areas you can see listed here. Debbie will discuss trails and access. Brian will get onto recreation and educational uses. And I'll be back to talk about the remaining goals. So with that, I will turn it over to Debbie.
Hi, everyone. So one of the more visible management activities that will be occurring over there, especially over the next few years, is the creation of a sustainably developed trail system with parking and trailheads for public access. We'll have 2 parking lots for approximately 12 cars, one on Merrymeeting Road and one on Birch Hill Road. Each of these parking lots will be utilized as a trailhead, and then we'll have a 3rd trailhead as well, located where the Woods Road enters Birch Ridge Community Forest from the Towns Beach parking lot. The trailheads will contain a kiosk, there'll be a trail map and other information about allowed uses for the property. So by creating this access, the public will be able to more easily recreate on the property for activities like hiking, wildlife viewing, and snowshoeing, with mountain biking and snowmobiling also allowed on designated trails. With the exception of snowmobiles, I will note that the conservation easement that's on the property that Brian talked about a little bit earlier prohibits all other recreational OHRV uses, and the property will be and is in places right now posted against unauthorized motorized vehicle use. There are about 13 miles of existing and planned woods roads and trails on the community forest. They include trails and wood road for both recreational use by the public, as well as some that are just for management access only or seasonal use by snowmobiles. So this map kind of shows everything that is out there or that will be out there in the next couple of years. With the current plans, there's about 10 miles of planned trails to be used for the public trail system. And the locations that are shown on this map and the following maps, I just want to note that they do show them in the approximate location. However, when they're physically laid out, we'll put them in the best place that they can sustainably allow. Yeah, so they can sustainably allow the use, the planned use and designated uses on the trails. So the exact locations may look a little bit different when everything's said and done. So let's see, so we currently have 3 main uses of categories for trails that we're working on at this time. Pedestrian uses such as hiking, mountain biking, and snowmobiling. So this first map shows the trails that will be designated for pedestrian uses like hiking. You'll note that all 10 miles of the currently planned trails for the public trail system will be available for hiking, and then 2 locations for hiking only, which are the trail over Mount Eleanor, which is this one right here, and then a portion of the Birch Ridge Loop. So mainly due to terrain, these are going to just be open for people on their feet. Mountain bikes are planned to be allowed on the majority of the trails, about 9.4 miles. And again, you'll notice that the Mount Eleanor trail that's right here is gone, and then this little trail, the Fall Line Trail, as it's been called, is also not going to be available for mountain bikes due to the terrain, as I said, and it also really gives a pedestrian-only trail for people who want that over Mount Eleanor as well. Use of some of the trails for snowmobiles is done through the partnership with the Powder Mill Snowmobile Club. The snowmobiles will have access to about 6 miles of trails, which covers a portion of the Corridor 22 that goes through the property, the lake trail that goes from Corridor 2 down to the town beach parking lot, and then what is right now called the Scenic Loop, which is up here. There's also several seasonal access points for the snowmobiles to enter onto the community forest from abutting properties. These are seasonal uses, and they'll be allowed as long as the neighbors are allowing the snowmobile club to access their trails as well. And I'll also point out one other trail that's marked as the Blueberry Trail that's right up here. And this will be seasonal use that allows them to go up and enjoy the view for a little bit before turning back on, turning around and continuing on their journey for the day. We also have additional considerations for trails and trail uses that we're working on as well. The first one is the creation of a universally accessible trail. The creation of the universally accessible trail will provide an opportunity for those in a wheelchair or who are otherwise limited in their mobility to get outside and enjoy the community forest, including the views from the cabin area. So the idea is for the trail to start at the parking lot on Birch Hill Road, go to the cabin and beyond with the goal of providing up to a 2-mile loop is what we're currently thinking. We've begun the process of designing the trail, so we're able to find a suitable route and determine the cost for construction. After discussions with the steering committee, it was determined that the use of horses on the trails needs some more time for consideration. With the impacts from the recent extensive timber harvest prior to self-ownership, there's a significant amount of work that needs to be done to restore the roads used for management access. This requires the replacement of several stream crossings, drainage work, and restoring the roadbed itself, and is expected to take a few years to complete. As we work toward allowing houses to use the trails, the equestrian community will be engaged to assist us as we determine trail and parking needs. This goal for the collaboration is for everyone to understand the work and funding needed to create and maintain trail use by horses. And when that's understood, the goal is to move forward with planning for this use on certain designated trails. The last topic for consideration at this point are additional access points. All the new trails for access to the Birch Ridge Community Forest will be evaluated to determine if the need is there as they come up. Current additional access points being considered are providing access from Lions Camp Pride and relocation of the Mid-Lake Trail currently designated for winter snowmobile access so that we can better locate it to provide year-round public access. As we consider these and other potential future access points, we'll also consider how the potential expansion of the Birch Ridge Community Forest can help us with these decisions. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to get the trail system in place, and I'm now going to briefly explain our planned activities from 2020 through 2022. As we go through the plans we currently have outlined, it's important to point out that all of this planned work is also dependent on the capacity of staff to manage the work, contractor schedules, availability of volunteers, and the funding we have available to implement the work. This year we have been a bit delayed due to COVID-19, and while we have had to adjust our plans somewhat, we're still on track to get quite a bit done. So planned for this year is the installation of the 2 parking lots along with 3 trailheads and kiosks. So you can see them right here. The cars are the parking lots on Merrymeeting Road and Birch Hill Road, and then the 3 kiosks. And I will note, residents of New Durham do know that the parking by the town beach is restricted to residents during certain portions of the year, which is why we're not having parking there, designated parking there. We've also begun to install gates to control unauthorized motor vehicle use. And most of these are in, and we'll evaluate if we need more, either gates or some other form, boulders or something to keep that use out. We'll also be completing further repair of Corridor 22 and Lake Trail this year. And some of that work is starting in August. And we're currently designing, laying out, and getting ready to install Mount Eleanor Trail and the trail from the parking lot on Merrymeeting Road up over Rattlesnake Mountain. And then finally, as I mentioned, we are working on the design and cost to install a universally accessible trail. It will not look like the circle that showed on the screen, but this is just showed to put on to kind of let you know the general area that it will be. So it's going to start at this parking lot. It'll go parallel to the road, to the rest of Birch Hill Road. The cabin is about here, if I'm getting this right. And it will extend somewhere around here. The terrain works best for us in this area. So we're looking forward to seeing what that's going to look like. If you were to walk out there today, and many of you driving on Merrymeeting Road in the last couple of days have probably seen the work out there, you'll see that the parking lot on Merrymeeting Road is currently being constructed, and the Birch Hill Road parking lot will follow that. This work is being done with a lot of help from Russ Weldon and Mike Gelinas, who are volunteering their time and equipment to get it done. And we are extremely grateful for that. Rattlesnake Mountain and, it'll be an unpaved parking lot. Sorry, we had the question. They will be unpaved, gravel. That's okay. All right. Yes, so we, sorry guys. I'm totally lost. So signs and kiosks at the trailheads will be installed later this summer after the parking lot is done, and we'll have to get some temporary maps together to put up there as well. Okay, so 2021, we're going to continue to install gates and control the unauthorized access as needed. We will also continue to do more repair work on Corridor 22 and the Lake Trail. We'll do any remaining work that needs to be done on Rattlesnake Trail if we can't get that done all this year, and which is right there. We will also begin to design and install the Birch Ridge Loop trail. Some of it's in place and some of it has to be created. We are going to look to relocate this Mid-Lake Trail to a location to get better community access from South Shore Road. We hopefully, if we have the funding, we will be able to start putting in the universally accessible trail next year, and then we'll update the maps and trail guides as we need to. Okay, so 2022. This is the last year I'm going to lay out, and it's hard to predict this far in advance a lot of times, but we're fairly confident we can stick mostly to the schedule. So again, we'll continue to work on controlling unauthorized access to the trails, and we'll continue to monitor and repair Corridor 22 and Lake Trail. We will finish up the Birch Ridge Loop if we need to, if we don't get that all done in 2021. And then again, we'll continue to work on the universally accessible trail as funding allows. At this point, we will also begin to engage the equestrian community about the trail planning and the potential trails for horseback riding. And then we'll install trail maps, kiosks, and guides, and trail junction signs, as well as the trails are finished up and finalized. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Brian.
My apologies to Debbie for giving her a note and interrupting her presentation. A couple of questions have come in that I'll try to answer. So yep, the parking lots will be unpaved, as Debbie said. There was a question about horseback riding, which I think we've answered. Essentially, there's an expectation from the steering committee that horseback riding will be allowed on certain trails, but at this time, given the repair work and additional work needed, horseback riding is not going to be allowed at this time. We're going to go through that process of working with the equestrian community to figure out what trails make sense and then understand what the maintenance costs are for that. In addition, there are unique parking needs for trailers and horse vehicles because they're larger that we'll have to address. There was a question that came in about the parking lots as well. So the parking lots that the planning board approved will be for 10 to 15 cars initially, with the expansion opportunity for doubling that or more. So we don't want to overbuild them initially, but we anticipate that maybe the initial sizing of 10 to 15 cars for each of those lots might not be enough at certain times a year. So the planning board does understand there's a phase 1 and phase 2 for the parking lots. So if there's other questions that I missed, we'll get them at the end, and we'll try to answer them as best we can. So the other recreational educational uses for Birch Ridge, this is a video that Matt Murphy shared of a bull moose, I think that's a female moose and young calf on top that he captured this winter. So hunting and fishing are allowed. Dogs are allowed on the property. There will be some requested limitations in sensitive areas where we'll ask people to leash their dogs, and there'll be signs to indicate that. Those are primarily in areas with vernal pools or other sensitive habitats. The property is not going to be open for target shooting, recreational trapping, or baiting wildlife. These are uses that have significant levels of public concern about, and were not supported by the survey or the comments we heard as well. Under consideration, so just to remind folks, as Charlie said, we had that input session at the school, over 100 people attended. We also did a public opinion survey that was mailed to all residents and property owners, and that received a lot of feedback that helped inform us in addition. And camping and the cabin were discussed through a lot of that, and we had a wide variety of opinions about camping especially. Camping presents some unique challenges for an organization that owns a property. Is it dispersed camping? Is it camping on tent platforms? Is it in other structures? Do you provide sanitary facilities? How do you deal with light pollution that might result from camping? The reservation and maintenance system. So all those things are things that CELT would like to continue to explore with further input from the steering committee and respond and present a plan to address that. There might be a role for that in the future, but it's undetermined. The cabin, the cabin has been agreed to be retained for future use, and we appreciate the help of volunteers who spruced it up, cleaned it out, and cleaned up the grounds around it. And then this last year, we saw one of the possible uses of it, which was the Powder Mill Snowmobile Club did use it as a warming hut, and maybe some of you enjoyed that as well. We heard a lot of good ideas about it when we did the input sessions, including using it for school groups as like a welcome center, maybe renting it out for people to stay overnight. So it's in pretty good shape for what it is, and maybe there's opportunities to continue to use that to benefit the community at large. Our education outreach program, so even during the COVID-19 pandemic, there are still programs happening. We had a field trip at Birch Ridge this past Saturday. We had to limit the number of attendees, but they're very popular. So both SELT and Moose Mountain Regional Greenway will be hosting programs at the property, and they'll be the primary ones. But there'll be other organizations as well that are welcome to use the property. To kind of coordinate and understand what's happening, we're going to need to develop some procedures and policies for those larger group activities, simply to manage the possibility that a school group might show up from out of town with 3 buses of kids, and the New Durham school's there as well, and suddenly you have 200 people trying to use the same area. So that's something that we're working on. We're also hoping that this property can support and enhance educational opportunities with the school district, and that presents some challenges, as you could expect. Teachers, administrators have a lot of work before them, and engaging the school in a way that is compatible with their limitations and understands their needs is really the focus. So we're hoping to continue to develop that and understand that and figure out a way that this community forest can be part of the school experience. And other communities have done this, so there's good examples of how it can be done. All right, well, I think at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Charlie for an overview of forest management and wildlife. And Zoe will have to unmute you, I think, Charlie.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thanks,
Okay.
Charlie.
I'm going to be talking about the natural resource goals, those being forestry, wildlife habitat, scenic values, water quality, and climate mitigation. It makes sense to kind of keep all of those in mind as we talk about each one, because there's a lot of overlap and interrelatedness between them. When you work on one, you can affect others, or you may have to rely on one such as forestry to accomplish a goal related to wildlife, for example. So they all kind of work together. I want to just make it clear to you that what you saw happen on the property in the years preceding SELT's ownership is not what we call forestry. It was timber liquidation. That type of cutting we don't anticipate ever happening on this property again. As you may recall from the vision, we had talked about sustainable forest management, and that is our goal. However, given the very heavy cutting that's occurred, the forest at Birch Ridge needs time to recover. If you look down through this list of forest management activities, you may not see a lot that you would consider forestry. Well, that's because there really isn't any commercial type of forestry that can occur there for quite some time. So allowing the forest to restore itself, to recover itself, to help when we can, is an important objective. However, that doesn't mean that nothing will happen. And there will be activities that are going on there, as you can see here. Could I have the next slide? Next slide, please. Here we go. Some of you may recognize this as the area out in front of the cabin. One of our objectives, and this is fulfills many different objectives, is to restore the old field that used to be there. Those of you who've been kicking around New Durham and this property for quite some time know that They used to be able to see the lake from the cabin, and now really you can't. And it's because the forest has grown. You know, we're fortunate in this part of the world that, you know, you give a tree a chance and it'll jump out of the ground. So we have no difficulty growing trees in New England, especially northern New England. But restoring the view of the lake from the cabin will satisfy scenic objectives as well as wildlife habitat objectives to recreate, reestablish the old field habitat that was there. Another thing on this slide here, this is at the north end of Birch Hill, Birch Ridge, and many of you may recognize this. I've been in New Durham for over 30 years. Those who've been here a lot longer than me say that this area used to be a productive blueberry field, and obviously it's not now. So one of our objectives, and again to meet multiple objectives and benefits, is to restore the former blueberry field that was in this area at the north end of Birch Ridge. This is what it looks like now. It's heavily treed, but the trees are small. Something I want to mention related to the last slide and this slide is that while we would use forestry techniques to accomplish this work, there's no revenue that's going to be generated from them. There's no value in wood that would be removed. So these activities represent a cost. And in order to generate the funds to accomplish this work, we're going to be looking at grants. We're going to be looking at opportunities to acquire funding. Again, it's going to be a long time before wood from this property really generates any revenue. And that will influence the timing of some of this work. We want to get it going as quickly as we can, but we just have to be realistic that the funding has to be available. Next slide. This clear cut, this gets back to perhaps a more traditional forest related activity. Within the clear cuts, and there are quite a few on this property, the objective is to monitor tree growth, to conduct regeneration surveys, and perhaps identify treatments to achieve desirable forest stand development. Often, if left to their own devices, you know, the trees that come back may not necessarily be the trees that would provide the most value from an economic standpoint or from a wildlife habitat perspective. So regeneration surveys will take a look at what's coming back in. We'll make decisions about what we want to have happen there, and perhaps some intermediate treatments will occur. In some of the more heavily cut areas that you may not recognize as a clear cut, many of the trees that were left behind are really low value, low quality, perhaps not something we want to see in the future forest. So some of those areas may have to have some overstory trees that are widely scattered removed to help get us to the high quality forest regeneration that we want. I also want to mention that within these regenerating clear cuts, we're presented with a wildlife habitat opportunity, a slate of wildlife species that are declining most significantly in our state as our forests mature and age are wildlife of young forest stands. We call early successional habitat. So we'll be evaluating these regenerating clear cuts to identify areas where it may be appropriate to to sustain young forest and to favor early successional species. Next slide. That brings me to the wildlife habitat component. Some of the items listed here I've already talked about. I want to point out to you in the photos. On the photo on the right, you can see that's the cabin location. You can actually see the cabin in that photo, and you can see the small opening that remains there. Out on the ground, we can see evidence of the old field that used to be there extending down at least as far as that purple line encompasses. So we're looking at an area of perhaps 5 acres of old field restoration work, removing the trees and trying to maintain a shrubby, herbaceous type of habitat in that area. The photo on the left shows you the large beaver pond that's at the southern portion of the property, and the area that surrounds it was, the loggers did a pretty good job of respecting the buffers around wetlands and the flowages that come into that large wetland are really in pretty good shape. From that wetland down further south, kind of to the lower right of the photo, you can just see the top edge of Cold Rain Pond. Well, a lot of the distance between those two water bodies is wetlands and young forest habitat. It's this area that really provides the greatest wildlife diversity on the property at this time. And we would like to manage this as kind of a wildlife focus area. Could I have the next slide? This is one of the log landings. Over the 2,000 acres, if you discount the clear cut, which are really just regenerating forest stands in a very young condition, there's not a lot of areas that are not forest on this property. One of those, or some of those that are the log landings that were utilized in this past harvest. The intention would be to monitor the vegetative response here, try to keep it in a herbaceous condition, which would benefit wildlife, both forage and cover for nesting and rearing their young, as well as maintaining these old log landings for future forestry operations. Again, at some point in time, many decades down the road, there will be sustainable forest management occurring on this property. And these log landings, we want to have them in a condition where they could be easily reutilized by future forestry operations. Next slide. This is the beaver impoundment. And as I said, this is really the location of the greatest wildlife diversity on the property here and in that area of wetlands, both flowing into this and flowing out of it. We would manage this area as a wildlife focus area. Next slide. So far, there have been 89 species of wildlife recorded on this property, most of those from casual observations. Most of them, again, bird species, but many reptiles and mammals as well. 89 sounds like a lot, and you know it is, given the again, kind of the informal way that the sightings have come in. But I would expect that we'll have many more species identified on this property, perhaps even double this number. Scenic views. We already discussed the view from the cabin area, restoring and maintaining the view and the work that needs to be done there. Many of you that are, if you're familiar with the property, you certainly know these two granite pillars. And it said that, if you stand in the right location, you can see Mount Washington on a clear day. And this isn't the only spot. You can see it from many places. It used to be a lot easier to pick out when they ran, when the Cog Railroad ran the steam trains, because you could just look for the smoke. But it still is a spectacular view. So on a clear day, good spot to come in New Durham to see Mount Washington. There are other views that were created through the type of heavy harvesting that occurred there. These views are more temporary in nature, and you can easily envision the area right in front of us here that's showing the east end of Merrymeeting Lake. as growing back to what you see over on the left side of this picture. This view is going to disappear. And that's true of a number of the current views. So part of our Scenic Resource Challenge is to identify those areas where the view may be lost, where there's a nice view that people can get to relatively easily, and determine how and when we would want to do some work to maintain those views. They all won't be maintained, but we'll try to identify the more significant ones. Many people consider seeing wildlife to be an aesthetic experience, and go out specifically to look for wildlife. As I mentioned, one of the best places to see animals is at the beaver pond. And we will explore opportunities to construct a viewing platform at the pond. You may think that, well, isn't that a bit intrusive? But in fact, if you can channel human activity to a certain point, animals will adjust to it, and it'll help perhaps protect from kind of impacts around other portions of the shoreline in the absence of a place for people to go specifically to view wildlife. Plus, it might be a nice spot to spend time. Next slide. This is this slide and the next one give us the tentative schedule for forestry, wildlife, and scenic view work. As I've said, you know, this work is going to require funding to be identified. That means identifying granting and foundations, grant opportunities, plugging into their application cycles, and waiting to see whether we're successful in acquiring funds. So while we have a schedule here, you know, we ask for your patience in understanding that there needs to be flexibility in order to acquire funding to get some of this work done. But the things that we've laid out, we consider to be high priority actions in the short term rather than the long term. Next slide. Water quality, a very important goal on this property. The property has over 31 vernal pools, 125 plus acres of total wetlands, several thousand feet of perennial and intermittent streams. Most of the activities that I've discussed relative to the other natural resource concerns do have the potential to impact water quality. But we'll take all steps that are necessary to perfect water quality. Next slide. This year, as has already been mentioned, there are 3 stream crossings that will be restored with grants from the Aquatic Resource Mitigation Fund from Department of Environmental Services. These funds help to cover the cost of acquisition of the property and included additional funding for stream crossing restoration. There are other areas, which you're looking at here being one of them, that need to be restored. Given the streams, you know, the lengthy intermittent and perennial streams on the property, it was inevitable that the logging operations would cross them. They did cross them legally. However, you know, they didn't run right through the water here. There are forestry techniques that they utilized. But this is the way it was left. And clearly, this really doesn't serve the purpose for water quality, for wildlife habitat, for visual resources. So there are areas in addition to the ones that we currently have funding for that need restoration. We will evaluate those crossings, identify them, and seek grants to cover the work. The Aquatic Resources Mitigation Grant requires buffers between logging and water. These buffers are included in the conservation easement that is held by the Moose Mountain Regional Greenway. So not only are creating buffers like you see here to protect water quality, not only are those good management practices, but they're actually legal requirements on this property. Work plan over the next coming years, you can see here. Next slide. Finally, our management will be climate sensitive. You know, there's a lot of work being done related to climate mitigation and sustainable forest management. Right now, we don't fully understand what this means, all of it means. But as I said, many researchers, universities, others like the U.S. Forest Service are trying to figure it out. So we'll stay up to date with the climate science and implement appropriate guidelines as we learn of them as they become available in our plans here for Birch Ridge. And with that, I will go back to Brian.
All right, folks, you've been really patient, and we are nearing the end of the formal presentation. Some more questions did come in, so we'll try to answer a couple before I talk about the next possible phase. There was a question about whether trees have been replanted in the areas that were cut. And as Charlie alluded to, we're fortunate in New England that as anybody who owns a lawn that doesn't mow it over a couple of years, or a hayfield, it reverts back to forest very quickly. Unlike the western parts of our country where there is a lot of planting, or even in the North Country here where they plant for specific trees, we do not have to do that to have regeneration. So all that regrowth you're seeing is the natural regeneration that happens after a cut, and different species have the chance to react to increased sunlight. Someone asked about whether there's a list of species for wildlife that have been found on the property. It is contained within the management plan. I think it's a specific appendix, so you can look at that. And if you've spotted or have photographs of other species, we'd love to keep our knowledge of who is using this property updated, so feel free to submit that. And there was a question about a butter concerns about parking along the edge of Birch Hill Road. And we're hoping that with the establishment of a parking lot at the top, that will funnel most of the interest and activity to that parking area to use the trails. But if other parking issues happen along public roads, what our experience has been is that the best solution is for a Board of Selectmen to adopt necessary ordinances to prohibit parking in areas that are impacting abutters. We certainly want to minimize those types of impacts. And if specific issues arise from such uses as secondary trails, and et cetera, the best approach is to contact us and seek our help and input so we can be responsive to that. We certainly had increased use during the COVID pandemic of other properties because people are hiking locally. I know there's another question about mountain bikes and maps, and we'll get into that after this presentation because it's going to make me go backwards in the slides. So, all right, so as many of you I think are aware, and maybe this is what you're excited about for tonight, is the Southeast Land Trust and working with the Lake Association is working on a larger initiative that we're calling Keep Merrymeeting Clean. Merrymeeting Lake is, by many accounts, the most cleanest, the most pristine lake in the state by many measures. And there was a management plan done in 2019 that confirmed that keeping the watershed intact as undeveloped forest land is one of the best ways to keep the water quality high. And that's because it reduces sedimentation and nutrient loss from development and runoff into the water going into the lake. So the Keep Merrymeeting Clean initiative actually has two different projects embedded within it. One is Mount Molly, which is shown on this map in orange. And I'm not going to talk about that project tonight, but I'd be happy to talk to you if you have questions about that. Really, because of this meeting is focused on Birch Ridge, we have the opportunity to acquire two adjacent properties to the Birch Ridge Community Forest owned by Stell and Young. And these combined projects would increase the watershed protection to 29%. Just to note that before the Birch Ridge project was done, only 4% of the Merrymeeting Lake watershed was conserved. So pretty amazing, and that's a good sign that if we're able to successfully protect a large portion of the watershed, the water quality should remain as good as it is. So as I mentioned, the Stell & Young tracks, they're about 640 acres. They're located off Brienne Road and Birch Hill Road. Has a very small portion of frontage on Birch Hill Road that is where a stream crosses at the bottom of the hill. And we've agreed to buy them for their appraised value, which is $880,000. These are some great photographs, by the way. A lot of the photographs you've seen tonight are from Jerry Monkman, who's out of Portsmouth, and he does amazing photography, including these that you're seeing here. 97% of this property is a priority underneath the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department's Wildlife Action Plan. And that's just to help you understand that its context in the larger landscape is that it is providing a diversity of habitat and habitat that's important. This property offers miles of new trails. There's about 3 miles of Snowmobile Corridor 22 on it, and there's a network of woods roads on the property. And we anticipate some trails being built on this property, but part of what we're looking for tonight is understanding what you all know about it and what might make sense. Good news is that earlier this spring, we applied for and were awarded a $485,000 grant from the Community Forest Program. That's the same program that provided $500,000 for the initial purchase of Birch Ridge. So we're thrilled to get a second round of funding for this project, and it's jumpstarting the effort. This map was one of the maps we depicted and submitted to that program. So it's a little different than the other maps. So I'm going to just hopefully guide you through it slightly. The Birch Ridge property as it is the yellow outline, and Snowmobile Corridor 22 is this dotted line going through the property. Here's Birch Hill Road and the proposed parking lot that we will be working on in the next week or so with the help of Russ and Mike. The cabin's up here. So the two additions are over here in red, and you can see Corridor 22 snakes through it and off along Mount Jesse and around the rest of the lake. And that's the main snowmobile trail on this property. There is a slight spur to a scenic outlook on what is actually part of Birch Ridge as well. It has access off of Brienne Road at the end of the cul-de-sac, and on a Class 6 road, Webster Road, which is either discontinued, it might be discontinued, but it's not really a public access point. So the primary access points are anticipated to be through Birch Ridge Community Forest itself, or potentially off of Brienne Road. That's just a quick snapshot of the property and where it sits on it. And one of the things it does afford is also some great scenic views from it, with some small clearings being reestablished, as well as some views from the lake up to it as well. So because it's directly adjacent to the Birch Ridge Community Forest and part of that same network, it's assumed by CELT and by the steering committee that the vision and goals for this addition will be consistent with the vision and goals that you've heard about tonight for the larger Birch Ridge Community Forest. So they'll be extended to this property. But we're interested if folks have comments or input about what are the features of this property that you know about that are especially of interest to you. Are there things that this expansion of the community forest can offer that's not currently available? For instance, one of the goals that we've talked about is trying to connect a trail from Lions Camp Pride up to Birch Ridge. The current property of Birch Ridge, that area would require a significant expenditure because it's so steep and problematic for access. And it's possible that these additions might be able to provide a more suitable route to connect those. And then also, you know, are there concerns that people might have about this expansion that we should understand as an organization as well as the steering committee? So that's a quick snapshot overview of growing Birch Ridge, part of the Keep Merrymeeting Lake Clean initiative. So just to remind you, we've had some people raise their hand. That's a feature in Zoom. We have some questions that have been submitted. We've tried to answer most of them. Debbie's given me a couple more. And then if you have comments or questions that come up after you've left tonight or in the next couple of days when you're talking with family members or friends, please submit them to brcf@seltnh.org. That's the email that we'll use to collect that, and those comments will be shared with the full steering committee to understand that. So a couple more questions that I'm going to try to answer for the group. Blueberry restoration. So yes, I spoke with someone earlier today, and I think he asked the question again. There are millions of blueberries right now on top of Birch Ridge. And what really is exciting is that as many people know, it used to be actively managed for commercial blueberries on the top. And we don't seek to become a commercial blueberry operation at all. But if the succession of tree growth continues, those blueberry bushes will eventually die off from shading. So by reestablishing it through some cutting and possibly some controlled fire burns, that would really expand and enhance that and really provide a benefit to the community. We'd be excited about the possibilities of families going up there and being able to pick blueberries as part of their afternoon adventure. So if we're successful in planning for that and implementing it, it would be in a few years and would really enhance some benefits to the community. Another question about the parking lot size and whether it would be limited so we don't have some of the challenges that other properties like Mount Major have. Yes, we fully understand that concern. Right now, we've gone through the planning board approval process, and the parking lots are limited by what was approved, which was a phase 1 and a phase 2 for each of those parking lots. And I think the phase 2 is anticipating up to 24, maybe 30 cars in the expanded parking lots. So this is, Mount Major is a unique property where it's a relatively easy hike and it gets you amazing views. Birch Ridge offers some of the same possibilities, but I would say while the views are amazing and it's got a great diversity, it's not going to be as easy or as attractive, I think, as Mount Major. And it's certainly not our goal to have thousands of visitors every day. So you wouldn't see us advocating for continued expansion of parking. Hopefully that won't be a problem, but it would be something that we would have to work to address if it becomes a problem. There's a question about mountain bike areas, so I think I need to go back to that slide, so please bear with me as I scroll backwards. Okay, so this map is depicting the trails that exist that are going to be open for mountain biking, which is about 9.4 miles of the trails on the property. And I know that my definition of mountain biking and the definition of people who are serious mountain bikers are different, and there's a big preference for single track trails. These are currently shared trails, and so whether single track trails are something that would be possible is kind of beyond the scope of what was decided and planned on by this steering committee. We do have members of the steering committee who are serious single track mountain bikers, and maybe that's an opportunity for the expanded property as well. Maybe there's some ability to implement that in the future. Again, given the property's condition and the impacts of the significant timber liquidation, we've had to really reset expectations about how quickly things can be done so that we can implement and manage the property well and be a good steward of it over time, slowly increasing what's possible based on resources and interest and how the property responds. So I'm hoping that helps answer the questions about mountain biking. While that slide's there and people are looking at it, there was a question about whether the slides can be viewed afterwards, and we will try to post the presentation and possibly the whole recorded Zoom presentation onto our website in the next couple of days, so that if you have questions or want to share it with friends, you can do that. Great. I'm going to check and see if there's any more questions that have come in that we've missed. If anybody has their hand raised as well, we could actually let you speak directly with a question or comment. So I'm just going to get to the end again. Bear with me. Ooh, that's way beyond the end. Sorry about that. Okay, so Do we have anybody's raised hands that would like to actually speak live with everybody?
Peter's hand in? Bruce, yes.
Who's it?
Bruce Filbert.
I think, Zoe, if you could unmute Bruce Philbrick, or maybe Bruce, you could unmute yourself. We'd be happy to hear your comment or question. I'm not hearing anybody yet, so just making sure that they know that. And I don't know, I don't think I have the ability to actually unmute you, so.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Bruce.
Yes, as a person who has hunted that area for many, many years, with the lack of being able to use four-wheelers, I was wondering if somehow there could be some kind of a provision made that if we do harvest a deer or a bear or something up high on the mountain, if we could just be able to use the current main trails to get up there and then be able to bring the animal over to the four-wheeler to get it down. Is that something that could be looked at?
Charlie, are you there? Do you have an answer to that? Because you are far more familiar with hunting on larger properties than I might be with your experience with New Hampshire Fish and Game. I think that presents some challenges about how that could be managed, but Charlie might have some thoughts.
And I think it also is likely a violation of the conservation easement, which restricts motorized recreational use, limits it to snowmobiles. I understand the concern, and we'll take a look at that. If if you take an animal high up on the mountain, that's a lot better than taking it down in the swamp. So
Yeah.
But I don't know if that would be possible. We'll look into it. There may be a restriction.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the question, Bruce, and thank you for tuning in tonight.
Peter has his hand up, but I think he might not want to say something.
So Peter Coffin, your hand's up. I know you're on our stewardship committee, and do you have a comment or a question that you'd like to share, or is that just, okay, your hand is now down. Okay. Would anyone else like to provide feedback or comments? This is a great chance. Other people might be thinking the same questions. Just like school, there's no dumb questions.
Somebody said, will you send out another email when it's up on the website?
Yeah, there is a request or suggestion to send out an email when the recorded Zoom or the PowerPoint is up on our website. We can do that. We'd be happy to do that, and also remind people the chance to provide feedback. So just, I'm gonna go to the next slide while people are, things are percolating in their heads. So as a reminder, we're taking those feedback, those comments through July 29th. We've had extensive public input and public process to date, so probably won't expect a lot, but we'd be welcoming to hear thoughts or comments. The steering committee will be meeting in early August. The date will be determined once we have some more participants in the meeting poll. And they'll be reviewing the feedback, any comments that are shared to them outside of this meeting itself, and then, if necessary, proposing revisions to the management plan, and then hopefully recommending the management plan to CELT's Land Stewardship Committee, which then, in our process as an organization, our Land Stewardship Committee recommends detailed plans to the board, who then accepts and votes on them. Just so folks know, you should not be concerned about our board of directors rejecting a management plan with this level of public engagement and input. They're aware of the work to date and are really supportive and excited about the community forest. This is a process that we have in place simply to meet our requirements for accreditation by the Land Trust Alliance, which is a national organization that helps organizations such as CELT manage themselves well and to high standards. Charlie, do you have any additional comments that you would like to share as the chair of the steering committee? I want to thank you personally for your leadership and your effort. There are numerous members of the steering committee. All of them have contributed in their own way, and we really appreciate that, because we know that the success to date and the work that we've been able to accomplish as partners would not have been possible without that.
Oh, thank you, Brian.
I do see one more question, Charlie, before you
Go
maybe
ahead.
have. Can snowmobile trailers use access points? So I think the question might be asking if snowmobiles that drive in, can they park their trailers in the parking lots to then access the property for snowmobiling? At the top of Birch Hill, I would say yes. At the Merrymeeting Road one,
There's not gonna be.
that one's not going to have a snowmobile access point from that trail. That trail will, at this point, be limited to pedestrian uses and bikes. And Birch Hill Road is a Class 6 road that is maintained through the diligent efforts of Mr. Edwards, the abutter, Steve Edwards, at the top of the hill, who lives in that house. And it's unlikely that we will be plowing out the Birch Hill Road parking lot consistently at the top, given that that road can be very challenging to maintain for Steve, and managing access up that hill all winter long might present significant burden to him as the person who solely manages it. The town does not do any work and does not want to do any work on Birch Hill Road as a Class 6 unmaintained road. So hopefully that answers, helps clarify that a little bit. Any other questions or thoughts that folks would like to share? Or Charlie, do you have some closing comments or anything?
No, I just would like to say we look forward to comments that people will submit over the coming week. And we also look forward to expanding the community forest by another 600 plus acres. And thank Southeast Land Trust for jumping in with both feet.
It's been fun. So thank you everybody again for sharing your evening with us. And I'm going, when I end this meeting, it ends for all of us. So don't be surprised if it suddenly you all disappear and are not in a meeting anymore. We really appreciate it and look forward to any feedback, and hopefully your support for the expansion of Birch Ridge and protection of Mount Molly as well. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.